there, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Rings of Power, which is a new Amazon show which does the prequel job on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Now, as you know, Lord of the Rings was a massive, successful trilogy in the early 2000s. It was followed by a prequel trilogy, which was not meant to be a trilogy, but The Hobbit. And if you've seen in my videos, you'll know that I was not the biggest fan of the Hobbit trilogy. I thought it was overlong, like most people actually. The director didn't want to be there anymore, it seemed, and generally it was not the biggest success. It felt like a contractual obligation. It was meant to be Guillermo del Toro. A lot of rights issues caused problems, so he backed away and Peter Jackson took over. But it probably would have done better if Del Toro was the director of that one, to be honest. Looking back now, it would probably be better for everybody if Del Toro was the director. But then he'd have been stuck within what became a bizarre setup of expansions of the well beyond what the tales could really hold. So, of course, because this was still a big hit, I mean, the Hobbit series, it went down and down in grosses as it went on, but they still did very well. I mean, they still cost a lot of money, but made a hell of a lot of money, just from goodwill of the films, the original films. And there's still goodwill coming from the series. Everyone kind of knows that Peter Jackson going to get screwed over the Hobbit a little bit, so it's like, there's still some goodwill towards Lord of the Rings. And since there's been some time passed, allowing people to watch what Disney's done to Star Wars and the films, that people are now a lot more goodwill towards the Lord of the Rings again. So Amazon decided to do a TV show. Amazon bought the rights to certain parts of the mythology to do a TV show based on the rise of Sauron and during the Rings of Power time, the Second Age, basically, is what it's called in the various writings of Tolkien. Tolkien did lots of writings, did Silmarillion, lots of other short tales. I have not read them. I probably never will read them. I'm not that interested. I watch the films once in a while. I like the Lord of the Rings, but I'm not a massive fan of it. I don't know all the minutiae. If they change stuff from the books to the films, I'm probably not going to notice. I have read the original 3 Lord of the Rings books, but it was years ago when the films came out, the Lord of the Rings films came out, so it's been a while, so I can't remember everything. And I'm not like someone who's that interested. So I'm just going to look at this from the point of view of a TV show based on material. And it's got this very strange, relationship with the films. And they can't really, like Peter Jackson had to do with this TV show. There was a chance it was going to be, but because of disputes between him and one of the Tolkien family, and one or two members of the Tolkien family apparently did not like the films. Which is odd, because the films made Lord of the Rings suddenly much more successful. And won Oscars and stuff. So it's like a strange relationship they've got between the people who made the original family and the adapters who made this thing much bigger. So the family gets a bit more control of this one. So no Peter Jackson. And you can tell there is an echoing of the Peter Jackson ideas in this, but they're not allowed to have Peter Jackson involved. And one of the big problems is stuff Peter Jackson, even the Hobbit trilogy, did better than they do here. So there is a problem, a lack of Peter Jackson problem, which would have been okay if they'd found someone else to take over who had their own ideas and who could have pushed it forward in an interesting way that wasn't harking back so much to what Peter Jackson was doing. And all the things that he set up that have become tropes of this genre that he took from Tolkien, and then he's created a cinematic version that have now become tropes within filmic versions of fantasy. So it becomes an issue where it's like they can't go in one direction away from that because people watching this are admirers of the films. So they can't go and do their own thing, so they have to rely on what's been done. But some of the people involved in the show were not happy with what was done. So it becomes this kind of weird identity crisis show that has a lot of problems. And it has a bunch of other problems beyond that too. But that's one of the main issues is you're seeing like a cover version of a Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings film done as a TV show. And that kind of creates a disconnect in the audience because you know you're watching something that's not quite what you remember, but it's trying to be what you remember. And it's not, doesn't have the confidence to go and be its own thing. Like it does little things to try and be its own thing and then just jumps back straight in to going to the tropes. So it becomes a frustrating experience in lots of ways. Now I should say I enjoyed the show despite the fact that it was very flawed. And to be honest, I was giving it an easy ride. Like, I'm pretty sure if I was a much more Tolkien fan, I'd be much more broke with this show. You know. And even when I talk about it now, I can criticise for lots of stuff that I didn't ultimately care about that much, but I know are problems. But because I kind of liked the world, I liked one or two of the characters, that was fine. But it does have massive problems. It has severe problems. The first major problem really is they cover so much in the first 10 minutes of backstory. Now remember with Lord of the Rings there's a backstory that covers quite a lot of the backstory of the ring very clearly, just to give you what you need to know and then we'll fill in the rest later on. You don't get that with this one. You get a flashback to a scene in this the land before they come to Middle Earth, which makes it just look like another field, basically. So the big land of the gods that you're meant to find awe-inspiring, the land of the elves, looks like a boring field. So that does not start off with showing the magic of this world. In fact, it makes it look pretty mediocre. Not a good start. Then you have so much exposition for like 10 minutes of the War of Middle Earth. And you're just throwing names at you and action scenes at you, and it's like, I have no emotional involvement here. This should have been like the first episode. There was so much here. You needed an episode or two of just of this before you got to the rest. So that's a major problem, is the sense of it doesn't do what Peter Jackson managed to do, which was to actually, and his collaborators. Because, I mean, Peter Jackson wrote a script with Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh, and they kind of rewrote it until it was right. Which this did not happen here. Instead, you get lots of stuff, and then you get a scene where, so you get introduced to Galadriel early on, you see her going through the walls, and then you see her trying to hunt down Sauron after the walls are all over. You've got all these names thrown at you, and people arrive and die within like 2 minutes. And it's just a unholy mess of like, why am I supposed to care? Like, why? What's going on here? So that's a big problem early on. So before you even get into the story of the characters, you've had a lot of effects thrown at you that have not set up the world, and they've taken away one of the big bits of magic in the world, which is, what does the elf world look like ultimately when it's not Middle Earth? And they've done this in the most boring way possible. So you're like, okay, the magic's already gone in the first scene. And in the first scene you also have a brother, Galadriel's elder brother, talking to her in a very boring scene. It's like, wow, this is not the way to start a show. You know, this was obviously a scene that should have been taken out and maybe brought back later as a flashback, and maybe some stuff done with it, make it as a memory so you don't see the full, so you're not seeing the elf world, basically, to make it still magical. So because there's a whole section in this first episode where Galadriel has to enter the elf realm again at a certain point because she's gone too far and become too violent and revengeful to heal herself and things. And at that point, you're looking at it going, I don't care. I just don't care. You've already blown this within a minute of the opening episode. It's a bad sign. And there's so much exposition that's happened so early on that I didn't care about any of it. And it took me a long time to get me interested again because it was like, this is just bad storytelling. Just throwing names at you. And so you find out there was a Sauron before Sauron called Morgoth who needed to actually have the build up of how dangerous this guy was, not just a name. And why is he different from Sauron exactly? Takes forever to explain that in the series. In a way, it's not interesting. And that's a big problem. There's so much lore in this stuff, and so much of it is not that interesting. And most of the reason for that is how it's presented. Because this is a TV show, it's written like a very much a 2000s TV show, where there's a convention of whatever the subtext of the scene is, that'll be said in dialogue rather than in character work. Like if someone's worried about something, the character's worried about something, instead of actually setting stuff up over an episode, and you're seeing through interactions and events that this person's worried about it, and do it in a way that you can emphasize with, and feel something for. It's just thrown at you. So it's just like that kind of TV show where someone has a speech, explain everything they're worried about, and the poor actors have to try and pull off something that's unsayable because no one would talk that way. Now, Peter Jackson had some of those scenes in the Lord of the Rings films because they were needed for a certain style, an old-fashioned style of storytelling that he had. But he knew you couldn't rely on those scenes. Those scenes were there for purpose every so often. But a lot of times in between that, you'd have character scenes of people acting the way people would act. Like you'd see people flawed, seeing people being silly, seeing people being scared. So that you get to know the characters through their actions rather than being explained to you who they are. So when you get to the scenes where you have to hear something, it doesn't feel as much so expositional, so you actually focus on what's been told rather than being explained what the subtext is. And even if they have to explain what the subtext is at some points, it's done so that you do feel for the characters, because it's been spread out so you don't actually feel that you're getting clobbered with this every 2 minutes. So it's a thing is, you can get away with this kind of stuff if you kind of spread it out a little bit. And if you rewrite it so it does still sound like what the person would say, and you've worked with the actors and found a way for them to put in their words, even if you're going for a stylized version of it. And because it's an old-fashioned technique that's very much in 1930s and 40s cinema, that's more old-fashioned, pure characters style that we don't have anymore. They made it work because they understood you have to believe this stuff, you have to sell it and work it through other actions and interactions. This show doesn't have that. This show pretty much has people saying what the subtext is all the time. Like, there's no room for subtlety. Like, at all in this show. There's no room for it. And it gets really annoying. Luckily, I managed to offset that because I watched a projector, and even as a TV show, if you watch a TV show on TV, the small screen takes away from the epic feel, the epic world you're in. So that's going to be those kind of conventions of dialogue in the forefront. So if the dialogue's not that good, that becomes the forefront, and it really takes away from the actors. If you're seeing it in a bigger screen, yeah, getting the world. So that gets de-emphasized. So I was kind of lucky how I watched it because some of the stuff that would have annoyed me the hell out of me if I just watched it on TV because I watched it projected, well lessened because I could look at the world behind them and that was always nicer. So there was that issue. Just the dialogue was very old school dialogue style. They're trying to make it like Lord of the Rings, but they're also doing it very 2000 TV. And there was just no empathy for anybody, no sympathy for anybody. There was just, you couldn't connect with them, or you couldn't imagine what they're feeling a lot of the time because you're actually so distant from the technique, because the writing technique's so weak a lot of the time. That really affects the acting because if you have an experienced actor, there were some experienced actors here who knew what they were doing, and you could tell they were getting over the hump of some of these dialogue scenes because they've been in plays with bad dialogue before, probably, and they've found techniques how to say it and how to deliver certain things that might be a bit dodgy, but they're professional, so they can do it. So certain actors rise above the flaws. So even though you're knowing that the dialogue is not great, they're really putting the effort in to make it sound good, and they know how to be professional about it. So certain actors do come across well, and other actors, mainly the young ones, come across really awkwardly a lot of the time. In some cases, that's fine if it's a person whose character's awkward. Like, you've got a young Isidore, who if you've seen the films, you know he's a guy who took the ring and caused all the problems for the Lord of the Rings. So he's in it, a young version of his character's in it, but he's a character who's distracted, unsure of himself, awkward generally how he expresses himself. So the awkwardness of the actual dialogue actually is fine with him, and it's fine with that performance because that's a character. So that's fine. But it's other ones like his sister or lots of like younger character or actors around in show. Whenever you cut to them, sometimes it comes across as really awkward because they're getting asked to say things that feels as if the actor themselves are not comfortable with and have no frame of reference for, and have no tricks to get around it. And that's a hard thing to do. Younger actors have limited experience, and you have to protect them. And this show does not protect them. This show does not write scenes that they could understand as people from their own experience as a building up to technique. This doesn't do that. It makes them have speeches that are nonsense, that are far worse than what they did in Lord of the Rings. Because Lord of the Rings, again, they kept on rewriting the film around the actors once they got an idea of what the actors actually sounded like and what they said, and so they could actually mould the film as they went around the actors to actually make everything naturalistic. This TV show doesn't do that. It doesn't feel like someone who's watching, because of the three different directors and you've got showrunners, one person who's with the writers and or is also directing, who can see, okay, that's a problem, we need to adjust this to make it more naturalistic so we can understand what's going on a lot easier in a way that the audience will understand. There's just none of that there. There is a kind of a feeling of a big machine of a production there that is just, churning out the days to get this thing done. But it's at the expense of the quality. And there's just an awkwardness a lot of the time. And it's cut between, like, quite a few stories, ultimately, and not always the best way. And there are issues throughout it that way it cuts around, because some stories are better than others. Some stories have narrative drive and some stories don't. And even the stories with narrative drive to them, they sometimes stall for quite a bit, and there's a stop-start nature to this show that is, I think, is the thing that offsets everything and makes everything feel clumsier, is the fact that it stops starts all the time. And you jump between stories, and some stories just stop for a while, and it's like, do you run out of material there? Why is this? Why are we not going back there now? Or what the hell's going on? Why is this so awkward? And whilst they've got lots of supposed mysteries that aren't really mysteries, so that's a kind of a issue. So I'll go to the stories now. What the stories actually are. So you've got the worst story by a mile is the Proto Hobbit story, where a stranger comes down from stars and he doesn't know who he is, and when these hobbits are these small creatures will become hobbits. They actually are hobbits, but they're, instead of actually having a land of their own, they're nomadic. They're going from different place, summer and winter, to survive. And they are basically, you know, they're hobbits. So even though you've got you don't have the issue of the cuddliness of them. They're still basically hobbits. They're still small creatures. There are a few problems with this. One, they hire tall actors. The actors in this show are way too tall to play hobbits. Like, you look at the Lord of the Rings, they hired small actors to play hobbits. And even Martin Freeman, when they did the Hobbit trilogy, seemed a bit tall for a hobbit. But in this one, they hire Lenny Henry as one of the hobbits, and he's tall. And you know he's tall. You just look at him and go, this guy's a tall guy. Why is he playing a hobbit? And he didn't even give any to either. So it's a waste of time, ultimately. The character's a waste of time. And this is the section where it has a lot of young actors who are been asked to do very hobbity things and who are not good at it. And it has a lot of motivations that are weird. And it's got that thing I complained about in Prey, where they try to do this kind of, these characters who are of an older time and a different mindset, but they portray them as Disney princesses. So the lead Hobbit character is this young girl who is rebellious and wants to prove herself to the world, and the world doesn't care about her, and the world's too dangerous to her to be who she is. And it's like, this character, even if they're rebellious, would have enough common sense to know the world is dangerous for someone her size. And it's just written kind of really awkwardly, and it's portrayed in a show where there's lots of war. This is portrayed in a way that actually feels stupid. And again, they kind of have the actors doing the same things again and again, be plucky, be this, be that, and it means by about the fourth episode you're sick of seeing her, because the character doesn't have any depth to her. And the actress herself is doing her best. It's not like it's a bad acting performance. It's just she's given garbage to do. And you know the stranger's Gandalf. You know, he looks like Gandalf. He's lost his memory, but you know it's Gandalf. So it's like, there's no mystery. They're trying to make it seem like he might be Sauron, because Sauron has disappeared in this show. And everyone's trying to figure out who Sauron is. And you know it's not him. So that's meant to be the big mystery. And we know it, and it's a complete waste of time. And this story meanders forever. It meanders for so long. Probably as long as this video has. And because there's two suspense things. Who's the stranger? We know it's Gandalf, so you know that he's going to protect them ultimately. And how they're going to get from one place to the next when things are going wrong for them. Now that could have been a good scary idea, as how scary it is for these small creatures having to hide and get from one place to the other as the weather changes. That could have been good and scary if there were a lot of incidents happening to make it scary. A couple of things happen and nothing else. And it feels like just as about to start, okay, this is going to go towards having a suspense thing for the rest of the series, it kind of stops and you don't go back to it for a while, and nothing really that interesting happens there. And it's like, whoa, what's going on? And then suddenly they realize, oh, we better have something happen, so we'll have a wizard fight at the end. And it's like, this was a non-event story, because they the most human thing, the thing that I complained about, the thing that made you most humanly interested in these characters is the thing they ignore, which is getting from one place to the other and how scary it is. Instead, they have lots of speeches about how a very Hobbit and speeches given to these young actors who are trying their best, but they're not great writing. And these scenes repeat again, again, again. They might be charming, but they sound like, if you've ever seen plays about Irish folk in the 1930s, the Sean Casey stuff, it feels like every Hobbit is a drunken Irish person from the 1930s from an Irish play, basically, not Ireland, just an Irish play. It's cringy at times, and it's a thing that every time, eventually at some point, every time they go back to this story, it's like, oh god, really? Can we just skip this one? That was a worst story by a mile. You have other stories that start weak but get better as they go. You have Elrond in this, who is an okay performance at the start, but he gets better as he goes on, as he starts to find his feet. It's one of those things that sometimes you see an actor find their feet at a certain point in this series, because they're put in the pilot, the first 2 episodes, and then, because that's one of the shows that I think they had to stop because of the COVID, and then he started back up. And this actor seemed to have found himself by the time found his part at that point. So once he's dealing with the elves are dealing with the dwarfs. So we have the old cliche of the elves and dwarfs not getting on from the show. So already we've had the Gandalf formed a bond with hobbits, which is if to say this is how he formed a bond with hobbits. So you've got that. It's already from the films. You have this one, the elves and the dwarfs, and you can see the beats before they happen all the time. And you wish if they were better written, at least you would be happier with it. But at least this one's better because there's more chemistry between the actors. In the kind of the Hobbit one, the stranger, the Gandalf, is well performed. He's one of the best acting in it because he's very silent and very much in his eyes. And he does have good chemistry with the young girl playing the Hobbit with him. So when they're together, the scenes can work a lot better than it is when she goes back to her family. But in this one, there was a good chemistry between Elrond, Prince Durin and his wife. And that kind of grounds what is a very basic story. I mean, there's not much to this story, but it takes a long time to get there. But it's about Durin dealing with his father, played by Peter Mullen, and Elrond dealing with the council and realising there's some problems with the elves, and he has to try and solve it, and there's some duplicity involved. But it's still a very basic story. It could have been done very quickly and very efficiently. But the thing that works about it is there's a chemistry between the actors that develops over time, so that you're kind of engaged by it. It's probably the one I was engaged by most, even though in lots of ways it was the most cliched one, because the actors seem to like each other's company. And that goes a long way sometimes in a show, when the actors do seem to enjoy working with each other. And there is an element to this, and quite a few other sections of the show where it's multiracial, and it's like, oh, how can there be black dwarfs? How can there be black elves and stuff like that? I don't care. It became a massive thing on the internet. I don't care. You've got a land that's east, west, north, south. Some places are going to be warmer, some places are going to be colder. So some places, if an elf was born in the warmer place, maybe his skin would go different colour to protect it from the sun. You know, it could just adapt. I can find an explanation straight away. And you could have just done an explanation quickly and quietly in the background. The same with dwarfs, different climates. Maybe a dwarf came from a climate that was warmer. Because the idea is they set it up as this Durin's wife was not from the same tribe as Durin. He just liked her, so they got married. So there's certain explanations there. I don't really care. I think they can explain it more and just had there's more cultures here than they had in Lord of the Rings, and maybe it got people more tribal after the time of Sauron. Who knows? But it's not really worth the hassle, the internet hassle. It's as weird complaining about this as it is not noticing they're all white in the films. You know, it just feels like it's not an issue. Like in the films, I think Peter Jackson was pretty much, I'm going by the books, and the books seem to suggest these people were white. You can interpret in different ways. I don't think he really cared that much, to be honest. Here you got some the kind of idea of a woke agenda, and it does affect the film, the TV show a little bit, because they don't explain it as much as they should. Because if there's racial differences, because the different species are the kind of racial elements in the metaphor of the Lord of the Rings into films, and you can make more complications with that with different skin colours as well within these races. You could have done something interesting and brought it up, but instead it's kind of utopian, as if there's no problems here when you know there would be. That's the thing that kind of, I think is annoying, is like, you should bring this up a bit more, because, or maybe if they develop it in the second season, hopefully we'll bring it up more, as people can be stupid in that way. So, but I don't really care ultimately. I mean, this was based on European myths, and Europe in the past was very white, so that's why it's very white. Bringing in other cultures is fine for me. Just explain it a little bit in the show, and then it'll be fine. Because you do have variations. Some people are white, some are black, and some are in between, or darker skin but not black. It's fine. It's just people. Get over it. But there is this kind of smugness with the writers have to say we're colourblind. And it's like, no, you're dealing with racial problems. You should address it a little bit. So it's both sides are kind of are open to flaws. Like people saying it's all white. You're like, why do you need to be all white? And the people saying we're colourblind is like, people aren't colourblind. People are stupid. So there's that element. But that element works, I think, better in this story and the story of the elf than it does on the other ones. Because the Hobbits, it's weird, because I just think it's it'd make more sense with them. I just think because that whole section's so cliched that every person comes in and is like, well, you brought them in and gave them a really cliched part. And again, with the Hobbit ones, I was thinking, okay, you're doing this could be really interesting, do something with it. We're not doing anything with it. That was my frustration with that element, was, okay, you're going to do this, we'll do it. Really do it. Really show off the different racial tensions and different racial elements within. If you're going to do it, really go for it. Instead of just being like, we've hired different coloured actors, that's enough. It's like, no, if you're actually going to do it, actually make it something interesting. So I got kind of annoyed because, as I said, the kind of hobbits kind of act like Irish caricatures from the 30s. So you kind of feel like, why do you bring in people from different races to play Irish drunks? So there is that. I wish there was more interest in that area, because I don't care about the racial stuff as long as you do something interesting with it. Just make it interesting. You know, so there is that, but the elf dwarf stuff, cliched as it is, it's still the most enjoyable part of the show, because it may be a cliche, but the actors seem to be having fun. The elf love story on the southern borders is one of those ones where it's a case of the actors getting killed by the dialogue. It's actually the best story, most interesting story, because it's the rise of the Sauron's army, and it's these humans have just been left there to survive, and they've got a few elves watching them, been suspicious of them, because these were the guys who used to fight for Sauron. And it's the cliche thing of the people there learning as a threat and fighting back against evil. You've seen this one before in the Peter Jackson ones. This show is not doing anything different. You can map out the scenes and the speeches. This is all the obvious speeches and all the thing about. There's also a thing about an elf falling in love with a woman. That's been done in Lord of the Rings. Again, so cliched. But it has as another one has the advantage of, it has some of the strongest actors here. Like the guy playing the elf, he's dark skinned, and he gets terrible dialogue times, but he's really good. And I really wish they actually into that whole elf thing there was like variations of elves there, because he's really good and he's very strong when he's not talking. Because when he's talking, he has to be given just the most cliche dialogue. But as soon as he shuts up, and his eyes do the acting, his body language is acting, he's really good. It's like, get a decent rep for this guy, because he is one of the most interesting parts of the show. And his history would be really interesting to find out more about. Because he isn't normally even there. He does feel like he's outside of even to these own elves. So it's like, okay, where did he come from? This is interesting. They don't do much. But he's in love with this woman who's darker skinned as well, but she's human. And again, she's an example of an actress who does a good job when there's no dialogue. When there's dialogue, she's given stuff, and like the actor here, they're experienced enough to do it as well as possible with the dialogue they've got. But it is cliche upon cliche, so they're kind of doomed to spend half their time in this show spouting stuff that's nonsense. But they're doing their best, and when they're not spouting that nonsense, they are good. It's just they're stuck with some of the ropiest dialogue. The son character, her son, doesn't like the elf at the start and becomes warmer to him. It's an old cliche storyline. The actor at the start is a bit ropey, but as the show goes on, he seems to gain confidence and he's a lot better by the end of it. And one of those things is because it's a long production, probably just been around better actors probably helped him kind of find his feet. But again, like the elf dwarf story, there's nothing new here, but I like the actors, so that kept it going. I mean, those two stories needed more story and needed more originality, but I liked the performances and the actors despite some of the dialogue, so they kept me going through the show. The final storyline is the Galadriel storyline where she's chasing Sauron and then she ends up in Numenor and she has to deal with all the politics there and she has to inspire them to come to Middle Earth and help out against Sauron. And she also deals with this guy she meets on the seas. His boat's been trashed and now he's out in the wilds in the sea. They get picked up by a ship from the Numenorians, who are these humans who live a lot longer and who are the superior humans, really. And they fought with the elves against the Sauron in the past, and that relationship broke apart. And this is probably the peak of the show in a way, but it still has the same problems as the other things, where basically, instead of doing the cliche of what Peter Jackson did, it does the Game of Thrones stuff. So this one's a rip of Game of Thrones. It's pretty much Game of Thrones. You've got conspiracies, you've got intrigue, people feeling doomed, and just paranoia. And again, it's one of those things where the younger actors are terrible, but the older actors pull off the cod dialogue. And again, you like the characters a lot more. You like Galadriel's... I'm not going to try and pronounce her name. She's a Welsh actress. She was in quite a few films, including one I covered last year where she played a person who became very religious. She's terrific. She gets some terrible dialogue at times, and her character is blocked off to certain motivations that make her look a little silly at times. But she's playing a character who's very much motivated by revenge and trying to get through revenge. So you get a pass because one, the actress is good, and two, what she's doing makes sense, even though it makes her character look stupid. It's the one person who's playing a part played by someone else in The Lord of the Rings, where you kind of forget the other person because this is a basic interpretation of the character that's different. It's a different time in their lives. It's interesting on its own. So even though it's just a case of an actress pulling off stuff that the script could be better. there's another character who um, you're meant to be suspicious of, who picks her up in the boat and who travels with her to the Numenor and then to the Southlands, and people think he might be the king coming back to the king's line might be coming back to save them. And you're meant to be suspicious of him at times, you're not quite sure about him and all the rest of it. So this is where we're going into spoilers. I've tried to avoid everything else, spoilers until now, just give you a general idea what the story is. Spoilers, he's Sauron. And it's not a surprise, because by the time I'd get around to watching, because I watched this after the hit dog went out, just because I wanted to see that and not watch it week to week. So I knew before it started he's Sauron. But to be honest, even if I hadn't known, I would have known he's Sauron. It's so obvious. The writing is not subtle. But again, it's one of those things where the actor was fun. I enjoyed the actor's performance. His player character is double-edged. He could be a nice guy, he could be a villain. In the end, of course, he's Sauron. But he's enjoyable in that part. And this section's enjoyable because you get to see Numenorians who were the great warriors of the past who wiped out during his war. And all that stuff is fun, especially in older actors. You get Isildur's father, his character is a lot of fun in this one because he's trying to deal with the Queen and the politics, but also deal with Galadriel and her crazy. So you get a lot of stuff there, and there's a lot of enjoyable stuff, but it's stuff you've seen before in Game of Thrones, basically. And eventually it goes up all the different plot points eventually join, like the elf stuff in the south joins with this plot as they face back against Sauron's people. Mount Doom is created in a very weird plot twist where they stick this sword into the stone, it releases water that creates something, that creates Mount Doom and creates the land. And it makes not a lot of sense. It's like, you've had this thing for years and you couldn't start it up. Why don't you just build something that didn't need a sword in it to create this? Why don't you just hit an on switch or just push it down or something? It's not explained in the sense of, oh, I needed this certain power from this sword that was unique, and it was a power from the sword that created all that stuff. Instead, it just feels like it's an on switch. The sword's an on switch, and it creates Mount Doom. And it does feel like this is a terrible explanation. But the atmosphere when Mount Doom's created and what happens afterwards, as they have to try and escape from this hell, this area becomes a hellhole overnight. That's really good. It's just that the explanation is just dodgy as hell. By the end of the show, the first 3 rings are created for the elves. They need these rings, and the things come from the plot with the dwarf and the elves, and this certain metal that will combine with other metals will create the rings, which is what Sauron's trying to do in the first place. So you find out Sauron's been manipulating people, like the Numenorians to go to war. He's been manipulating Galadriel to get to this place so he can find the power structures, and so he's been manipulating everybody from the start. And it's enjoyable, but it's kind of tosh at the same time. It's that kind of thing, is like, I was having fun with this show, but there was so much wrong with it. And there were so many scenes where people were flying around doing crazy shit like Gandalf, and why? Who knows? It was fun. It was a throwback to Lord of the Rings. It just was like that kind of so-so version of something you like. That's not as good, but you can still kind of enjoy it because there's enough that you like, and some of the actors are game, but the writing could have done with a lot more work done on it and a lot more investment, because it just feels like there's certain things that they had points of interest when they wanted to get to from the stories, and they invented all stuff around that, and sometimes they took the lazy way option, and they also didn't rewrite it enough to keep working through so there wasn't gaps of interest, so the stories didn't drop dead. We had to wait for the other stories to catch up with them. There was a lot of that in this. Like, having 4 stories really meant that every story had an episode or 2 where it just dropped dead. And in the case of the Hobbit one, it was like, you needed some events happening there to actually make that story work, and you didn't have much at all. So, Rings of Power is a weird show. I enjoyed it, but it's a weird fantasy. It's also got this thing where all the men are almost like characters from like women's romantic fiction. Well, they're all like hunky and handsome, and you know, trying to do the right thing with other awful villains. But it did feel like you were watching like a Mills and Boons adaptation at times. There was that sense of they got. I mean, there is that element to Lord of the Rings anyway. It's a romantic fiction. There is that to it, but this one really pushes it way above and beyond. Where just all the men do seem to be a bit too hunky, and there's not any space for ugly buggers. Except for if you're ugly, you're going to be one of the villains. It's like, whoa, weird. I mean, you can get ugly women in this show, but ugly men, no, not unless you're orc. I just noticed that as I was watching. I was like, wow, there's all these guys do look like they're shot like romantic leads. Every one of them looks like, even the older ones look like romantic leads a lot of time, or authority figures or something. But they didn't. Anybody who was kind of vaguely ugly was a villain. So it's weird. It's really weird. The only ugly guy who wasn't a villain was the King Dwarf. So, but still, I would say if you like Lord of the Rings, you can probably endure it. Hopefully, we'll get better in the second season. Hopefully, we'll learn from mistakes and cut down the fan fiction. Actually, have plots that move forward with some momentum and aren't placeholders. You know, so just lots of stuff like that you notice that the films did right, that this does wrong. Like, it just is that kind of weird experience where it is enjoyable but really flawed. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm trying to get away now before I just meander too much. So that's me for now. Bye.